Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Whispers from the Shadows. I'm your guide through the dark corners of forgotten towns, restless spirits, and places where time itself seems to bleed. Tonight, we journey deep into the heart of Texas. Not the Texas of cowboy boots, wide open plains, and barbecue smoke curling into starry skies. No, tonight we peel back the golden sunsets to reveal something far more sinister beneath. Texas, a land of legends. Of oil barons and cattle drives. Of revolution and resilience. But like any place steeped in blood, fire, and secrets, it carries ghosts. And not just one or two, but dozens. Hundreds, perhaps. So settle in. Draw close to the flame. Turn down the lights, because tonight, I'll be telling you about the 15 most haunted places in Texas, each with its own chilling tale, its own spectral resident, and its own reason to never, ever go there alone. From abandoned asylums where screams still echo down empty halls, to lonely highways where hitchhikers vanish into thin air, these are not just stories. These are warnings. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The Driscoll Hotel, Austin, in the heart of downtown Austin, where neon lights flicker above bustling 6th Street, and the Texas State Capitol stands like a sentinel over the city's past and future. There stands a grand old lady known as the Driscoll Hotel. Built in 1886 by Colonel Jesse Driscoll, a cattle baron with dreams as vast as the Texas plains, the hotel was meant to be the finest hotel south of St. Louis. Over a century later, it remains a monument not only to luxury and history but to the countless stories whispered through its marble halls and gilded staircases. It was a cool autumn evening when Clara Bennett stepped through the heavy brass doors of the Driscoll for the first time. She wasn't a tourist or a business traveler. She had come searching for something deeper, something she couldn't name. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away just weeks before, leaving behind a leather-bound journal filled with sketches, poems, and one cryptic note. If you ever want to understand me, go to room 423 at the Driscoll. Ask for the key after midnight. Clara, a freelance photographer from Chicago, had always thought her grandmother eccentric, charming, yes, but prone to flights of fancy. Yet the journal felt too real, too personal to dismiss. So she booked a room across the hall from 423 and waited. The hotel itself seemed to breathe. Its red granite facade glowed under soft street lamps, and inside, oil paintings of long-dead cowboys watched silently from the walls. A grand staircase curved upward like a corkscrew, leading to upper floors where time moved slower. The air carried the scent of aged wood, cigar smoke, long band, yet somehow still lingering, and faint traces of rosewater. At 11:50 p.m., Clara descended to the front desk. The night clerk, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a bow tie, looked up from a book titled Legends of the Lone Star State. "I need the key to room 423, she said, trying to sound confident. The clerk didn't blink. "Room 423 hasn't been occupied in years." "I know. But my grandmother left instructions. She stayed here once, decades ago. In the 1950s, I think." He studied her face, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old-fashioned brass key, tarnished with age. "This key hasn't been used since 1957. Be careful what you find." Clara took the key, its weight surprising. As she turned toward the elevator, the chandelier above flickered once, just once, and the lobby clock chimed midnight, Room 423 was at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The carpet was thicker here, muffling her footsteps. When she inserted the key, it turned with a reluctant groan. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was frozen in time. Not dusty or abandoned, but preserved. A green velvet armchair sat beside a marble fireplace. An antique writing desk held a stack of yellowed stationery. On the wall hung a portrait of a young woman in a 1950s dress, her eyes hauntingly familiar. Clara gasped. It was her grandmother. She approached the desk. There, tucked beneath a dried magnolia blossom, was a letter addressed to "My dearest Clara." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it.my darling girl. If you're reading this, you've found your way to the truth. I never told you much about my youth, but here in this room, I fell in love, not with a man, but with a dream. In 1957, I came to Austin to study music at the university. I played piano at a small club on Congress Avenue, dreaming of composing symphonies. One rainy night, I met Thomas Reed, a writer passing through town. We spent 3 days together in this very room, talking, laughing, writing songs, and falling into a love so fierce it scared us both. But life pulled us apart. He returned to New York. I stayed, married your grandfather, raised your mother. I buried the music. But I never forgot Thomas. Or this room. Before he left, we wrote a song together. Whispers in the Hall. We hid the sheet music somewhere in this room, promising that if one of us ever returned, the other would find it. I came back many times, but never summoned the courage to look. Perhaps I feared finding it, or not finding it.so now. I ask you, search for the song. Play it. Let the melody rise again. Maybe then I'll finally be free. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. Tears blurred Clara's vision. She hadn't known this side of her grandmother. The artist, the dreamer. Now she understood the sadness that sometimes shadowed Eleanor's smile. She began to search. Behind the painting, nothing. Under the mattress, dust and silence. Inside the wardrobe, she noticed a loose panel at the back. With trembling fingers, she pried it open. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of yellowed paper. The title read, Whispers in the Hall, a Ballad for Eleanor, by Thomas Reed. She carried it to the grand piano in the hotel's lobby, which gleamed under golden light. Though it was past midnight, no one stopped her. The night clerk nodded from afar, as if expecting this moment. Clara placed the music on the stand. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She took a breath and began to play. The notes were soft at first, melancholy, like rain on a tin roof. Then they swelled, rising like a Texas sunset, full of longing and hope. The melody danced through the empty lobby, echoing off marble columns and crystal chandeliers. A few guests emerged from elevators, drawn by the music. Even the clerk closed his book and listened, and then, impossible though it seemed, Clara heard another voice. Faint, distant, harmonizing with the tune. She looked around. No one was singing, but near the staircase, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from asphalt, formed the silhouette of a young woman in a 1950s dress. Beside her stood a man in a trench coat, smiling. They were dancing. Clara played to the final note. The figures faded, hand in hand, vanishing into the shadows. When she looked down, the sheet music had turned blank. The next morning, the clerk handed her a sealed envelope. Left at the desk last night. Addressed to you. Inside was a photograph, her grandmother, young and radiant, standing beside a handsome man in front of the Driscoll. Scrawled on the back, "For every love that never ended, only paused." Thank you, Clara. She never saw the photo again after that day. But sometimes, when she plays piano late at night, she hears a second melody weaving through her own, one that sounds like Texas wind and forgotten promises. And if you pass the Driscoll after midnight, you might hear it too, a ghostly tune drifting from an upstairs window, where room 423 sits quietly, waiting for the next soul brave enough to listen. Yorktown Memorial Hospital. A story of light in the dark nestled between rolling hills and quiet suburban streets. Yorktown Memorial Hospital stood as a beacon of hope in the heart of Yorktown, Virginia. Its red brick facade, ivy creeping along the east wing, had weathered over 50 years of storms, both literal and metaphorical. The hospital wasn't the largest in the region, nor did it boast cutting-edge robotic surgery suites like those in Richmond or Norfolk. But what it lacked in size and technology it made up for in soul. The emergency room buzzed with a rhythm all its own, a symphony of beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, and hushed voices. Nurses moved like dancers, trained by years of instinct and compassion. Doctors scribbled notes between patients, their eyes tired but determined. At the center of it all was Dr. Elena Reyes, the hospital's chief of internal medicine. Elena had come to Yorktown 10 years ago, fresh from a grueling residency in Baltimore. She'd been offered positions at prestigious urban hospitals, but something about this small-town facility called to her. Maybe it was the way the sun hit the windows at dawn, painting the hallways gold. Or maybe it was the elderly woman who used to sit on the front bench every morning, knitting scarves for newborns in the maternity ward. Whatever it was, she stayed. One October evening, a storm rolled in off the Chesapeake Bay, darkening the sky with bruised clouds. Rain lashed against the hospital windows, and wind howled through the trees lining the parking lot. The power flickered once, then twice. Backup generators kicked in with a low hum. Yorktown Memorial was prepared for such things. It had to be. At 8:47 p.m., the ambulance bay doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in a gurney carrying a young man, unconscious, blood soaking his shirt. His name, according to the frantic EMT, was Daniel Carter, 23 years old, found unconscious near the old railroad tracks after a suspected assault. Elena met them at Trauma Bay 2. "BP's dropping," one paramedic shouted. "Possible internal bleeding. Pupils are reactive, but he's not responding." She sprang into action. "Get me and OR team ready. Start 2 lines, type O negative. I need a CT stat." The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Scans revealed a ruptured spleen and a fractured rib that had punctured his lung. Surgery was immediate. Elena scrubbed in, hands steady despite the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. As she worked under the bright lights, carefully repairing damage with meticulous precision, she thought about why she'd chosen this life. Not for glory, not for accolades, but because every person who walked, or was wheeled, through these doors mattered. Each had a story, a family, a dream. Daniel survived the night. He woke 2 days later, groggy and confused. His mother, a soft-spoken woman named Margaret, sat by his bedside, clutching a worn Bible. When Daniel opened his eyes, she wept. "You're safe now," she whispered. You're at Yorktown Memorial. They saved you. Over the next week, Elena checked on him daily. She learned that Daniel was a mechanic, saving money to start his own garage. He loved classic cars and had restored a 1967 Mustang with his late father. The attack, he said quietly, had been random. 2 men jumped him when he took a shortcut home from work. I don't remember much, he admitted one afternoon. But I remember a voice. Calm. Telling me I was going to be okay. I think it was yours. Elena smiled. I probably said it 100 times. That's the thing, Daniel said, looking out the window at the rain-slicked courtyard. When you're drowning in darkness, even one voice can feel like a lifeline. Word of Daniel's recovery spread through the hospital staff. Not because it was unusual. Yorktown Memorial saved lives every day, but because it reminded everyone why they were there. There was Nurse Patel, who brought Daniel extra pudding cups because he reminded her of her younger brother. There was Mr. Thompson, the retired janitor who came back to volunteer just to polish the floors outside patient rooms. And there was Sister Marguerite, the hospital chaplain, who left handwritten notes of encouragement taped to door frames. Even the building itself seemed to breathe with purpose. The old elevator creaked, yes, and the Wi-Fi cut out during thunderstorms, but the waiting room always smelled faintly of lavender, thanks to the vases of fresh flowers donated weekly by the Yorktown Garden Club. Then, in December, tragedy struck. A fire broke out in the basement storage level, likely caused by an electrical fault in aging wiring. Smoke filled the lower corridors, triggering alarms and evacuation protocols. Patients were moved to nearby facilities, and firefighters battled the blaze through the night. For 3 days, Yorktown Memorial stood silent. But the community didn't let it stay that way. Within hours of the fire, donations poured in. Local businesses held fundraisers. High school students organized car washes. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $200,000 in a week. People wrote letters, hundreds of them, sharing stories of how the hospital had touched their lives. My daughter was born here, read one. My husband died peacefully in room 314, surrounded by kindness. The nurse held my hand when I had no one else. When repairs began, volunteers showed up with paintbrushes and toolkits. The mayor pledged city support. Even the governor visited, standing on the front steps to declare Yorktown Memorial not just a hospital, but a heartbeat. 6 months later, the doors reopened. The new wing had modern equipment, better ventilation, and solar panels on the roof. But the old brick exterior remained untouched. The ivy was replanted. The front bench returned, and the knitting lady, now in her 80s, resumed her morning post. Dr. Elena Reyes stood in the lobby on opening day, watching families stream in for checkups, vaccinations, and simple reassurance. Daniel Carter was there too, now fully recovered, volunteering in the ER as a patient liaison. You know, he said, handing her a cup of coffee, this place isn't just bricks and beds. It's people. It's care. It's home. Elena nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. Yorktown Memorial Hospital wasn't perfect. It never would be. But in its cracks and corners, in its weary halls and steadfast staff, lived something rare and enduring, a quiet miracle of humanity, healing one soul at a time. And as long as there were people willing to show up, to fight, to care, to believe, it would keep standing, not just as a hospital, but as a promise. In the heart of Mineral Wells, Texas, where the wind carries whispers through the pine trees and the earth holds secrets beneath layers of limestone and time, there stands a towering ghost wrapped in stone, the Menger Hotel. 14 stories high, it rises like a forgotten monument, its windows dark eyes watching over a town that once pulsed with life around its doors. Built in 1925 by Goatman Bridge, it was meant to be more than a hotel. It was a palace of healing, luxury, and dreams. Back then, people came from all over the country, lured by the promise of the mineral waters bubbling up from deep within the earth. Doctors prescribed them for arthritis, fatigue, even nervous disorders. The springs were said to cure what medicine could not. And the Menger Hotel? It was where you stayed while your body remembered how to heal. When it opened, the hotel was dazzling. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Elevators hummed like magic boxes carrying guests to elegant rooms with private baths and telephones. Luxuries most homes didn't have. There was an indoor swimming pool filled with the sulfurous mineral water, believed to mend bones and soothe pain. On warm evenings, guests gathered on the rooftop garden, sipping cocktails as jazz floated from the ballroom below. The rich, the famous, the desperate, and the hopeful all walked these halls. Texas governors signed proclamations in the lobby. Hollywood stars passed through on secret getaways. Even Al Capone was rumored to have stayed in Suite 814, though no one ever proved it. Among those who knew the hotel best was Eleanor Whitaker, a quiet girl from Weatherford who arrived in 1927 at 17, hired as a chambermaid. She had a soft voice and a persistent cough, sent to Mineral Wells by her dying mother in hopes the waters might save her. Eleanor cleaned rooms, changed linens, polished brass, and listened. She learned the rhythms of the guests. The elderly woman who always left her slippers pointing east, the businessman who ordered black coffee at 3:17 a.m. every night. She never sought attention, but people remembered her, the way she hummed while working, the kindness in her eyes. One summer night, a composer named Julian Hart heard her singing as she dusted the grand piano in the parlor. He asked her to sing again. Then again. Then in front of guests at the weekly gala. Her voice, clear and tender, moved people to tears. Julian wrote a song for her, Mineral Wells Lullaby, and played it with the house band. For one night, Eleanor stood beneath the glittering chandelier, wearing a borrowed gown, feeling like royalty. But fame didn't follow. Julian left. Eleanor stayed. She grew old in the hotel's embrace, retiring only in 1968. Before she left, she slipped a note into the employee logbook. The baker remembers everything, even when no one else does. She died in 1975, alone in a small cottage near the springs. Some say on quiet nights, if you stand in the empty hallway on the third floor, you can still hear her humming. During World War II, the baker became a haven for soldiers training at nearby Camp Wolters. GIs on leave flooded its halls, dancing with local girls in the ballroom to big band music that shook the walls. Nurses from the base hospital came for tea in the sunroom. Love bloomed in stolen moments, in elevator rides that lingered too long, in notes passed during blackout drills. One such love belonged to Private James, Jimmy Calloway, and Nurse Margaret Lane. They met during a power outage, lit only by candlelight. Jimmy, a farm boy with a crooked smile, helped Margaret light the candles along the staircase. "You're not afraid of the dark?" she asked. "Not with you near," he replied. They spent 3 days together before he shipped out to Europe. They wrote letters, hundreds of them. Margaret kept every one, tucked inside a velvet-lined box beneath her bed. Jimmy promised he'd come back. Buy a little house near the springs. Start a family. But he never returned. His final letter arrived in January 1945, postmarked from Belgium. "Margaret, if I don't make it back, know that I loved you more than I ever thought possible. And if you ever stand in the baker's lobby again, look up. I'll be there in the chandelier, watching over you." Margaret never married. She stayed in Mineral Wells, working at the clinic until retirement. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, she returned to the Menger Hotel. Not to stay, just to sit in the lobby, staring up at the chandelier, whispering, "I'm here, Jimmy." Locals say that on foggy December nights, especially when frost clings to the windows, you can see 2 faint figures dancing in the empty ballroom. No music plays. No footprints remain. But those who claim to have seen them say the woman wears a pale blue dress, and the man in uniform holds her close, as if afraid to let go. By the 1950s, the world moved on. Airplanes made distant resorts easy to reach. Modern medicine dismissed the healing powers of mineral springs. Families vacationed in Hawaii or Disneyland. The baker began to fade. Guests dwindled. Staff were laid off. The grand ballroom hosted fewer events. The mineral pool was drained, sealed, forgotten. In 1963, a traveling psychic named Madame Zora stayed for a week. She claimed the hotel was thick with spirits, not angry ones, but souls who weren't ready to leave. She held seances in room 412, where guests had reported cold spots, flickering lights, and voices calling names in the dead of night. She said Eleanor still walked the halls, that Jimmy waited in the chandelier, that echoes of laughter from wartime dances still echoed behind the walls. Skeptics laughed, until things started happening. A guest woke to find her perfume bottle open, though she hadn't used it in years. The scent was lavender, Eleanor's favorite. Another swore he saw a man in a 1940s military uniform bow to an invisible partner in the ballroom at 2 a.m. Piano keys in the parlor pressed down one by one, playing a slow, familiar tune. Mineral Wells Lullaby. The hotel limped along, changing hands, trying to adapt. It became an apartment complex for seniors in the 1970s. But maintenance lagged. Pipes burst. Roofs leaked. Elevators groaned to a stop. By 1979, the last tenant left. The doors were locked. The lights went out. For decades, the baker stood silent, decaying, a hulking silhouette against the Texas sky. Vandals broke in. Graffiti scarred the marble. Nature crept in. Ivy cracked the walls, pigeons nested in ballrooms, rain stained the ceilings like old tears. But it was never truly abandoned. Urban explorers whispered about footsteps where no one walked, about breath on the back of the neck in empty corridors. Photographers capturing the decay swore their equipment failed in certain rooms. Room 412, the old switchboard room, the top floor suite. One man claimed he recorded a voice saying, "Check-in is at 3. When he played it back, no one was near him. Still, the town never forgot. Older residents told stories to their children. School kids dared each other to touch the front gate at midnight. Local legends grew, of a woman in white seen weeping by the old pool, of a soldier who saluted passing cars on misty mornings. Then, in 2017, something changed. A group of investors bought the Menger Hotel. Restoration began. Scaffolding rose. Cranes lifted debris. For the first time in nearly 40 years, workers walked the halls with purpose, not trespass. People hoped, maybe this was the rebirth. Maybe the Menger would rise again. And strange things happened during the renovation. Tools vanished, only to be found in places they'd never been left. Workers reported hearing music, faint jazz, a woman singing. One electrician, rewiring the ballroom, turned around to see an old-fashioned phonograph spinning slowly, though there was no power to that floor. When he approached, it stopped. Dust covered it like it hadn't been touched in decades. Another worker, cleaning the rooftop garden, found a small velvet box beneath a loose stone. Inside was a faded photograph of a young couple in 1940s clothing, Jimmy and Margaret. On the back, written in delicate script, "Forever at the Menger." No one knew how it got there. The renovation team left it on the ledge, facing the sunrise. When the hotel finally reopened in phases starting in 2021, guests checked in with curiosity. Some came for history, some for the architecture, others for the ghosts. And yes, some still report things. Guests on the third floor wake to the sound of humming. Housekeepers find rooms mysteriously tidied, beds perfectly made, though no one has entered. In the dead of night, the elevator sometimes moves between floors on its own. Security cameras show blurred figures walking hallways, but no foot traffic logs confirm anyone was there. Yet, the staff doesn't frighten guests. They simply smile and say, "The Menger remembers." Because in truth, the hotel was never just stone and steel. It was built on hope, on the belief that water could heal, that love could endure, that beauty could outlast time. It held joy and sorrow, birth and death, reunion and farewell. And places like that, they don't just disappear. They wait. They remember. And sometimes, if you stand very still in the grand lobby, beneath the restored chandelier, and listen closely, you might hear it. Faint, like a memory carried on the wind, the soft echo of a piano, a woman's voice singing a lullaby, and the sound of two people dancing, forever young, in a ballroom no one else can see. The Menger Hotel isn't haunted because it's old. It's alive because it was loved. La Carafe, Houston, in the heart of downtown Houston, tucked between towering glass skyscrapers and bustling streets that never sleep, stands a quiet sentinel of another era. La Carafe. It's not flashy. There's no neon sign screaming for attention, no thumping bass leaking into the alleyway. Just a weathered wooden door with peeling paint, a small brass plaque that reads EST 1973, and the faint scent of aged oak and spilled wine drifting into the humid Texas air. La Carafe isn't just a bar. It's a living archive, a dimly lit sanctuary where time slows down and stories gather like dust on forgotten books. For over 50 years, it has stood defiant against the relentless march of progress. No credit cards, no Wi-Fi, no pretense. Only cash, conversation, and carafes of red wine poured from dusty bottles with labels yellowed by decades. The story of La Carafe begins not with ambition, but with escape. In 1973, A French expatriate named Etienne Moreau fled Paris after a failed romance and a ruined art career. Broke and disillusioned, he landed in Houston by accident, a delayed flight, a missed connection, a one-way ticket with no return. He wandered the city like a ghost until he stumbled upon an abandoned warehouse near Main Street, its brick walls thick enough to muffle the world outside. Etienne saw beauty in decay. With what little money he had, he converted the space into a simple wine bar. He imported old barrels from France, hung vintage posters of Parisian cabarets, and filled the shelves with bottles scavenged from estate sales. He called it La Carafe, not grand, not poetic, just honest. A place where people could drink cheap wine and speak freely, away from the noise of modern life. At first, few came. Houston in the 70s was all oil booms and steel dreams. People wanted martinis and high-rises, not house red served in chipped ceramic pitchers. But slowly, artists, poets, and misfits found their way to Etienne's door. They came for the silence, the lack of rules, the sense that they weren't being watched or judged. One rainy Tuesday night in 1978, a young writer named Clara Reyes walked in, soaked to the bone. She'd been evicted from her apartment and had nowhere to go. Etienne gave her a blanket, a carafe of Malbec, and a corner table by the window. She wrote her first novel there, page by page, over 6 months. When it was published, she credited "A Nameless Bar in Houston Where Time Forgets You" as her muse. Readers guessed it was fictional. Only those who knew whispered. It was La Carafe. By the 1990s, the bar had become a haven for underground musicians, activists, and lovers meeting in secret. Police raided it twice. Once for serving alcohol without proper permits, once for suspected gambling in the back room. It was just two old men playing chess for nickels. Each time, the community rallied. Protesters gathered outside with candles and guitars. Journalists wrote about the last honest place in Houston. The city backed down. Etienne never married. He lived in a tiny apartment above the bar, tending to his vines on the rooftop garden. Yes, he grew his own grapes, though they never made great wine. "It's not about perfection," he'd say, wiping a glass with a faded linen cloth. "It's about showing up." He died in 2005 during Hurricane Rita. Not from the storm, but from a heart attack, sitting at his usual stool, a half-finished glass of Bordeaux before him. The night he passed, a group of regulars stayed until dawn, passing around his favorite bottle and sharing stories. No eulogy. No speeches. Just silence, and the occasional clink of glasses. Ownership passed to Marisol, a former waitress who had worked there since she was 19. Now in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and hands stained from years of handling wine bottles, she runs La Carafe much as Etienne did. Same rules. Same menu. Same stubborn refusal to change. Tourists sometimes wander in, expecting a trendy cocktail lounge. They look around, confused by the lack of music, the absence of menus, the fact that the bartender doesn't ask for ID. She already knows everyone. Some leave within minutes. Others stay, drawn in by the quiet. On any given night, you might find a retired judge debating philosophy with a street artist. A couple reconciling after a fight, their fingers intertwined over a shared carafe. A teenager scribbling poetry in a notebook, unaware that 50 years ago, someone just like her sat in that same seat, dreaming of escape. There's a legend among regulars that if you spend 10 nights at La Carafe, truly listening, truly present, you'll hear the whispers of those who came before, the laughter of jazz musicians long gone, the sigh of a woman leaving her husband in '83, the soft hum of Etienne singing French lullabies as he locked up. I came to La Carafe by accident, too. I was in Houston for a conference, overwhelmed by the scale of everything, endless highways, impersonal hotels, conversations measured in LinkedIn connections. On my last night, I took a wrong turn and ended up on Main Street. Through the fog of exhaustion, I saw that unassuming door. Inside, it felt like stepping into a dream. The air was cool, the light golden and low. Marisol handed me a carafe without asking what I wanted. "House red," she said. "It remembers you." We didn't talk much. I sipped the wine, earthy, slightly bitter, alive. An older man at the piano began playing a slow rendition of Blue Moon. No one applauded. No one needed to. I've returned every year since. Not because the wine is exceptional. Not because the food is gourmet. There's no food, just crackers and olives in a bowl. But because, for a few hours, I am not a productivity metric, not a resume, not a social media profile. I'm just a person, sitting in the hush, feeling the weight of history in the floorboards. They say Houston is a city of transients, engineers, oilmen, tech workers passing through. But La Carafe remains. It doesn't care about growth or innovation or skyline views. It cares about presence. About the space between words. About the courage it takes to sit still in a world that never stops moving. And so, while cranes rise and fall, while fortunes are made and lost, while the city reshapes itself again and again, La Carafe endures. A quiet rebellion. A toast to the forgotten. A carafe of wine, poured slow, in a city that finally learned to pause. The Marfa Lights, a desert mystery nestled in the high desert of far west Texas, where the Chihuahuan landscape stretches endlessly under vast skies and silence reigns like a monarch, lies the tiny town of Marfa. With a population barely over 1,000, Marfa is more legend than metropolis, a place where art galleries bloom beside abandoned gas stations, and where the horizon blurs between reality and myth. But among all its quirks and quiet charms, one phenomenon has drawn curious travelers, scientists, and dreamers for over a century. The Marfa Lights. It began in 1883, or so the story goes. A young rancher named Robert Reed Ellison was driving cattle through Paisano Pass when he noticed flickering lights dancing across the distant horizon. Thinking they were campfires from Apache raiders or perhaps distant settlers, he grabbed his rifle and prepared to ride toward them. But as he approached, the lights vanished, only to reappear moments later, farther away, bobbing like lanterns carried by unseen hands. No tracks. No voices. Just light, moving with purpose through the dark. Words spread slowly at first. Cowboys whispered about ghostly riders. Old-timers told tales of Spanish conquistadors still searching for gold, their torches eternally burning in the night. Others claimed it was the spirit of a lost lover, wandering the desert with a candle, waiting for her betrothed who never returned from war. But no explanation stuck, not really. Then, in the 1950s, the lights gained fame. Drivers on U.S. Route 67 reported seeing mysterious orbs hovering above the desert floor, sometimes red, sometimes white, often shifting colors. They darted, hovered, split apart, and merged again, defying logic. Some said they moved like intelligent beings. Others insisted they were just reflections from headlights on the highway. Skeptics pointed to car lights on Route 64, miles away, distorted by temperature inversions in the atmosphere. Scientists from the University of Texas came to investigate. Cameras rolled. Instruments recorded. And yet, the lights remained elusive, never quite captured, never fully explained. But this isn't just a tale of science and skepticism. This is the story of people, the ones who've seen the lights, believed in them, been changed by them. Take Elsie Carter, a schoolteacher who moved to Marfa in 1972. She didn't believe in ghosts or UFOs. She believed in facts, in chalk dust and multiplication tables. But one October evening, while driving home from Alpine, she saw them. At first, she thought it was a car stalled on the shoulder. A soft yellow glow pulsed near the horizon. Then it lifted, slowly, silently, rising like a balloon without string. It split into two spheres, one red, one blue, circling each other like celestial dancers. Elsie pulled over, heart pounding. She watched for nearly 20 minutes as the lights played, a silent ballet against the stars. When they vanished, she sat frozen, tears in her eyes. The next day, she called in sick. For weeks, she couldn't teach. She kept a journal now, filled with sketches and questions. What if we're not alone? What if there's more? Then there was Javier Morales, a Border Patrol agent stationed in Marfa during the early 2000s. He'd seen everything: smugglers, coyotes, heat-stroke victims. But nothing compared to the night he and his partner, Ruiz, encountered the lights during a routine sweep. It was midnight. The moon was thin. The air smelled of creosote and dust. Suddenly, a bright white orb appeared ahead, floating 10 feet off the ground. It didn't flicker. It hummed, low, almost subsonic. Ruiz reached for his radio. The orb shot upward, vanishing into the sky. Then, from behind them, another appeared, green this time, and began following their truck. They sped up. It matched their speed. Javier swerved. So did the light. Panic set in. Only when they crossed onto a different stretch of road did it blink out. They never filed a report. "They'd think we were crazy," Ruiz said. But Javier kept a photo, blurred, grainy, but undeniably something, on his phone until the day he retired. And then there's the old man who sits every evening at the Marfa Lights Viewing Center, just off Highway 90. No one knows his real name. Locals call him Abuelo. He wears a wide-brimmed hat and carries a leather-bound notebook full of star charts and hand-drawn maps. Tourists ask him questions. He answers in riddles. "The lights aren't from this world," he once said, sipping black coffee from a thermos. "But they're not outside it either. They're echoes. Memories of things that happened, or will happen." Some say he's senile. Others say he's the only one who truly sees. Over the decades, theories have piled up like tumbleweeds against a fence. Atmospheric refraction. Piezoelectricity from quartz in the rocks. Swamp gas. Military experiments. Interdimensional travelers. Spirits of the dead. Even lovers' legends, like the tale of a young Apache woman and a Texas Ranger who fell in love during the Indian Wars, only to be torn apart by duty and bloodshed. Some say the lights are their souls, forever seeking each other across the desert. But here's the truth about the Marfa lights. It doesn't matter what they are. What matters is what they do. They draw people in. Not just tourists with cameras, but seekers, those hungry for wonder in a world that too often explains everything away. They stand on that viewing platform at dusk, wrapped in jackets against the cold desert wind, eyes fixed on the empty plains. And when a light appears faint, distant, impossible, they gasp. They point. They whisper. For a moment, belief returns. Magic feels possible. One night, a little girl named Lila visited Marfa with her parents. She was 8, skeptical even then, raised on science videos and space facts. Lights can't just float, she told her dad. That's not how physics works. But that night, as they stood together watching the dark, a small golden light rose from the foothills. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. It didn't move fast. It didn't vanish. It just waited. Lila stepped forward. "Hello?" she whispered. The light dimmed, then brightened. Once, twice. Like a wink, she smiled. And for the first time, she didn't need an explanation. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be witnessed. To remind us that the world is wider, stranger, and more beautiful than we know. And so, year after year, the lights return. Not every night. Never on command. But often enough to keep hope alive. In a world of screens and noise, of answers at our fingertips, the Marfa lights endure, silent, glowing, eternal. A question written in light across the Texas desert, and the desert keeps its secrets. The water beneath the bridge. Seguin, Texas, in July, was a place where time dripped slow as syrup from a spoon. Heat shimmered off the asphalt like ghosts rising from the earth. The Guadalupe River curled around the edge of town like a lazy serpent, whispering secrets no one bothered to listen to anymore. But Elena Morales still listened. She lived alone in a yellow stucco house with peeling paint on Calle del Sol, just 2 blocks from the old railroad tracks. Her husband, Mateo, had left 5 years ago, not with shouting or slamming doors, but with quiet footsteps in the dark and a note tucked under the coffee mug. "I can't breathe here." She hadn't cried then. She'd folded the paper, burned it in the sink, and washed the ashes down the drain. Now, at 43, Elena worked nights at the 24-hour diner on Highway 90, serving eggs and bitter coffee to truckers and insomniacs. By day, she slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of water, rushing, drowning, calling her name. One August evening, after her shift, she drove past Woman Hollering Creek without thinking. The name had always unsettled her. Locals said it came from an old legend, a woman who screamed across the water when she was taken, or perhaps when she realized she could never leave. Some said her cry was sorrow. Others claimed it was rage. Elena had never heard it herself. But sometimes, standing on the bridge at dusk, she imagined what it might sound like. That night, she stopped the car, turned off the engine, stepped out barefoot onto the warm concrete. The creek murmured below, swollen from recent rains. Moonlight silvered the surface, and for a moment she thought she saw something move beneath. Long hair drifting like weeds, pale arms reaching. She shook her head. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep. But the next day she returned. And the next. She began bringing small offerings, a ribbon from her daughter's old hair tie, The girl lived now in San Antonio with Mateo and his new wife, a button from her mother's apron, a sprig of rosemary from the garden. She dropped them into the water and whispered names, her grandmother's, her sister's, her own. Then, one twilight, she heard it, not a scream, not a wail, not a laugh, clear, bright, bubbling up from the current like spring water breaking through stone. It startled her so badly she stumbled back, heart hammering. It wasn't sad. It wasn't angry. It was free. Elena stood frozen, tears suddenly hot on her cheeks. She had forgotten what joy sounded like unchained. The next morning, she didn't go to work. Instead, she walked into Seguin's tiny library, pulled out every book they had on local folklore, on rivers, on women who vanished or were remembered only by whispers. She found little about Woman Hollering Creek, just a line in a county history, named for a woman whose cries were heard nightly, origin unknown. But in a crumbling archive of old Spanish land grants, she discovered a faded map with a different name penciled in the margin, La Gritona, the Screaming Woman. And beside it, another note, in a shaky hand, no era triste. Rhea al final. She wasn't sad. She laughed at the end. Elena sat back, stunned. All these years, people had assumed the hollering was pain. What if it wasn't? What if the woman had finally broken free? That afternoon, she took her mother's sewing machine, the old singer with the chipped green paint, and dragged it onto the porch. She hadn't sewn in years. But now, she pulled out scraps of fabric, red from a dress she wore on her last birthday, blue from Mateo's abandoned work shirt, gold from a tablecloth her abuela brought from Mexico. She stitched without pattern, letting her hands remember what her mind had forgotten. By sunset, she had made a flag. Not for a country. Not for a man. For herself. She tied it to a broom handle and planted it in the yard, facing the road. Neighbors slowed their cars. One woman waved. Another crossed the street to avoid it. That night, she dreamed again of the creek. But this time, she stepped into the water. It wasn't cold. It wasn't deep. It simply held her buoyant as she floated downstream, her hair fanning out like wings. And when she opened her mouth, she didn't scream. She laughed, loud, unafraid, alive. When she woke, her cheeks were wet. The diner the next shift, Rosa, the young dishwasher with eyes too old for her 20 years, handed her a cup of coffee without asking. "You look different," she said. Elena smiled. "I feel different." Rosa hesitated, then leaned in. "My tia says that creek, some women go there when they've had enough. They don't come back." Elena stirred her coffee slowly. Maybe they don't want to. Later, walking home, she passed the laundromat where Rosa worked during the day. Through the steamy glass, she saw the girl folding towels, shoulders slumped. Something clenched in Elena's chest. The next evening, she returned to the creek, with 2 thermoses of café de olla, 2 folding chairs, and a jar of her famous guava paste. Rosa came, wary at first, then curious. They sat in silence at first, listening to the water. Then Elena told her about the laugh, about the flag, about burning Mateo's note and never looking back. Rosa stared into the creek. "My novio, he says I talk too much. Says I should be quieter. Like my mother." Elena sipped her coffee. "And what do you say?" "I say nothing," Rosa whispered. Elena reached over and squeezed her hand. then start saying something. They began meeting every few days, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to talk. Once Rosa brought her younger sister, then her cousin. Soon, 5 women gathered by the creek, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, all carrying silences too heavy to name. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They told stories. About husbands who forgot anniversaries. About bosses who touched too much. About children who grew up too fast. About dreams buried under bills and duty. And sometimes, when the wind rushed through the trees just right, they swore they heard it, the laugh again, rising from the water, joining theirs. One evening, Elena brought a cassette player and an old recording of Selena. They danced barefoot on the bank, skirts swirling, voices loud and laughing, until the stars blinked awake above them. No one called the police. No one complained. The next morning, someone painted over the graffiti near the bridge, crosses and crude words replaced with flowers, suns, and the word Libra in bold blue letters. Elena still worked at the diner. Still lived in the yellow house. Still woke some nights gasping from dreams of drowning. But now, when she passed Woman Hollering Creek, she didn't shiver. She waved, and sometimes, when the moon was full and the water high, she would stand on the bridge, close her eyes, and let her voice rise, not in sorrow, not in anger, but in laughter that echoed across the current like a song returning home. Because the woman in the creek hadn't been crying, she had been waking up, and so, at last, had Elena. So there you have it. 15 haunted places in Texas. Places where history bleeds into the present, where pain echoes through time, where the dead refuse to be silenced. But here's the thing about haunted places. They're not just about ghosts out there, about memory, about stories we tried to bury, but that claw their way back to the surface. Every creak on the stairs, every cold spot, every whisper in the dark, it's a reminder that what we do matters, that violence leaves scars, even on the land itself. So the next time you drive through a quiet Texas town, pause. Listen. You might just hear the wind carrying a name, a cry, a song from long ago. And if you do, say a quiet prayer, light a candle, and remember, the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting for someone to listen.